everyone, and welcome to After Alexander. Echoes of Alexander, Episode 1, The Greek Language. So, this is the first episode of a mini-series, which I hope will start to come into existence over the next few months and years, detailing how the actions of Alexander echoed throughout history and the minds of people who came after him. Why do this? Well, I think we haven't really talked about Alexander enough, to be honest, especially for a series which has his name in the title. This is understandable, given that our story pretty much starts with his death. However, I don't think it does him justice, given that some have seen him as one of the most influential people in history. So, in this episode, we're going to explore one particular aspect of his impact, specifically the Greek language. Now, we often think of ancient Greek as being simply one language. However, although this is true, there were many different dialects across the area, which was mainly due to the distances separating different groups. To some extent, this would be a bit like the fact that there were hundreds of different time zones in Britain before the railroads introduced one standard time. After all, the speed of travel had previously meant that this was never an issue. The Greeks themselves had a myth to explain why these different dialects had come into existence. Now, a bit of context is needed with the name of the character coming up next. So, I've used the term Hellenistic or Hellenization a few times now, and this is because Greece doesn't actually refer to itself as Greece. People aren't Greek but are Hellenic. In fact, if you go to the website of the Greek Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the modern name of the country will be listed as the Hellenic Republic. When Greece still had a monarchy, they were known as Kings of the Hellenes. I could go on, but the point is that Greece is a name given to it by outsiders, hence the use of the word Hellenistic period, for example. I'm not going to go into why this would be the case in this episode, so all you need to know is that the Greeks would have, and still do, think of themselves as Hellenes. So why is this the case? Well, it stems from the character from myth I'm now going to introduce, a man called Hellen, spelled with two L's. A trivia fact about Hellen: through his mother, he was said to be the grandson of Pandora, she of Pandora's box fame. This is a bit of a trivial aside, but I quite liked that fact when I found it out, and it's definitely an interesting one. Anyway, Hellen is believed in legend to be the ancestor of all Hellenes, hence the name. It's a bit like the idea that all the descendants of Heracles are called the Heraclidae. This name would probably translate roughly to the descendants of Hellen. Now, the mythical Hellen had 4 children, 3 sons and a daughter. His sons were called Aeolus, Xuthus, and Dorus, and his daughter's name was Xenopatra. The legend goes that Hellen's descendants would conquer the region of Greece around Phthia and extend their dominion over other Greek cities as well. People living in the area therefore became known by the name of their ancestor, or Hellenes. In fact, the usage of this term Hellenes dates all the way back to the poet Homer. These sons of Hellen were the ancestors of people groups and tribes of the Greeks. Dorus became the ancestor of the Dorian Greeks, while Aeolus became the ancestor of the Aeolians, as you might expect from the names. Through his 2 sons Achaeus and Ion, Xuthus became the ancestor of both the Achaeans and the Ionians. These 4 groups, Dorians, Aeolians, Achaeans and Ionians, were the 4 main groups between which the ancient Greeks considered themselves to be divided. The myth of Hellen and his children, therefore, is a way of explaining the diversity of dialects that existed in ancient Greece. As you might perhaps expect, all of this changed with the arrival of Alexander. His armies were made up of Greek speakers from all over the Greek world of his day. In the diverse army camps, a new dialect was born out of the melding of Attic and Ionian Greek, known as the Common Dialect, or Kini. This is spelled Koine, by the way. Kini is alternatively known as the Alexandrian dialect, and it is suggested that this new dialect was primarily based on Attic, with a smattering of elements predominantly from Ionic, but with other dialects thrown in for good measure. Incidentally, for those of you who don't know, Attic refers to the dialect used in the city of Athens. Kini spread along with Alexander's conquests, eventually being spoken from Egypt all the way to the Indus River. It became a common language for all of these diverse conquered and empire-absorbed regions, supplanting the individual and localized old dialects in Greece with one that everyone was able to understand. Once Alexander died, the language would be influenced by the cultures now living under Hellenic rule in the form of the Hellenistic kingdoms, the successor states with which we've already spent so much of our narrative. When the Romans eventually steamrolled their way into the Greek world, it was Koine Greek which was eventually used as a second language within the Roman Empire, with the Roman world becoming unofficially bilingual between Latin and Koine. You can see this split, for example, in the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire centuries down the line, with the Western Roman Empire predominantly using Latin and the Eastern Roman Empire being far more Greek. Some famous individuals who you've probably heard of would later use this form of Greek to spread their teachings, the Apostles. Koine Greek was the language that both the Old and New Testaments were originally written down in, and so it would also be known as Biblical Greek for this region. Later on, Koine would transition into the medieval Greek spoken by the Eastern Roman Empire, also known as the Byzantines to us today, which eventually gave us the modern iteration of Greek spoken by people in the Hellenic Republic today. Now, it was this diversity within the armies of Alexander the Great that would eventually sweep their way through the Persian Empire that gave rise to the dialect of Koine as a means of communicating and bridging the language barrier between individuals. Now, I'm not suggesting that Alexander masterminded some grand unification of the Greek dialects into a universal language. But my point is, it likely as not wouldn't have happened without him. And so, I would argue that indirectly causing the first ever unified Greek language is not bad as far as impacts go, and probably therefore worthy of the first Echoes of Alexander episode. So, for now, that's it from me. Hopefully, there'll be a few more episodes like this as we move deeper into our narrative, although I make no promises about when they will come out or what they'll be about. As always, thank you for listening. For any questions, comments, or topic suggestions for Divergence episodes, get in touch at the show's email address. Until next time, have a great week, everyone.